Hello and welcome to Wilson Center. Now I'm John Molesky. Welcome to a discussion of Brazil's presidential election. We're in that period between round one and round two, and we have a terrific guest to discuss the election. It's Paulo Sotero, the director of the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute. Paulo, welcome. Thanks
Pleasure
for joining
to be
us.
with you, John.
So in a piece you wrote recently, you described what happened in round one as an electoral tsunami. Explain what you mean by that.
Yes, it was obviously a radical changing political dynamics in Brazil, a country that has been governed mostly by center-left and left presidents and parties, or slightly center-right since the mid-90s, has shifted as far as the presidency to the right. The Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain who has been for 27 years in Congress, has won the first round in a very affirmative way, and is likely to win very easily the second round. It was an election where people voted not particularly for something, but they absolutely voted against the recent order established mostly by the Workers' Party, which once was such a great promise in Brazil, and did make some changes, especially under President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the most popular leader in Brazil's history, currently serving time in prison for corruption. People decided that it was time to change, and they wanted to get rid of anything that reminded them of corruption, of abuse of power, etc. It was clearly a middle-class vote. The middle class now, in part because of the changes introduced by Cardoso and Lula, composed the majority of the population, and so it was a rejection of the past and a vote for Mr. Bolsonaro because he embodied that. One important thing, and there is some parallel here with the United States, he early on, a candidate that was not really seen as having much of a chance, devised a campaign based on social media, did it very well, did it much better than all the other candidates, and is on the verge of being elected president of Brazil on the 7th democratic election Brazil has had since the reinstatement of civilian rule and of democracy in the mid-80s.
So Bolsonaro goes from being a fairly obscure backbencher to now the favorite to win the presidency. Is it just a case of he caught the wave at the right time, or has his career been building toward this?
Yeah, he caught the wave at the right time. He is not known particularly for the depth of his ideas, of what he wants to do. Actually, the campaign from the right and from the left has been remarkably devoid of content.
Well, hasn't he even said he doesn't even know anything about the economy?
Yes, he said that, and he will rely on one economic advisor who is a Chicago University trained economist. But he had one issue going for him, in addition of the fact that people are tired with the previous rule that sunk Brazil into the worst and longest recession from 15 to 17, and Brazil is not out of it yet. The lingering effects of the economy, of the recession, is still with us, and it will take a lot of change in terms of allowing investors, Brazilian and foreign investors, to come to Brazil to do business. There is no lack of interest on that, but Brazil is not a friendly country to investors. We'll have to change. We don't know exactly what Mr. Bolsonaro will do, but his economic advisor is a classic liberal guy that will try his hand in a country where the tradition in economic policy is statism. How it will develop, we don't know. We know that it will, and this is, I think, will continue in Brazil. I don't think that there is much of a risk for democracy in Brazil. Yes, Mr. Bolsonaro is seen, and he is a hard right person. Some of his critics, some of his opponents called him a fascist. But he will have to govern Brazil. There will be a Congress there. He will have the goodwill of the Congress for the first 6 months. Actually, his party, who was tiny.
Right, from 6 to 52.
Yes, it is now the second
So that's a pretty
largest.
big wave. It carried more than him to.
But it is comprised, it doesn't have an ideological identity per se. We don't know what that is. We know that they have the support of certain groups. For instance, one very important, the agriculture, the agribusiness in Brazil. Brazil is the second or third largest and most efficient producer of food in the world. But Brazil has to fix its infrastructure to become even more competitive. This group supported him. There is a group that is associated with security, police people, hardliners, etc. And then obviously the religious groups that very much inspired by the American experience. They are very important. They have a large number of people. So those three sectors are, I think, will be more influential than political parties per se. The Workers' Party of former President Lula, just to add something, has still the largest group of congressmen, about 56. And they are well rooted in states, in municipalities, and will certainly pose a formidable type of opposition. There will be democratic debate, but Mr. Bolsonaro himself, in his first interview to national television, said on Monday that he will continue to follow the Constitution of Brazil. There were talks that they were not going to, they were scrapped. That
It has some criticism of the previous.
Yes, yeah, but no, there is everybody in Brazil understand there is need for a reform, especially in some of the economic chapters. I think that he will not touch the civil. There will be pressures on that. For instance, he and his supporters are criticized for homophobia, for treatment of women's rights. This will come as, the struggle that comes ahead. What you say as a candidate is one thing. When you sit in that chair, we shall see if he will continue this sort of radical rhetoric. He actually, since the first round, he has already started the movement more towards moderation.
Tempering things a bit. Paulo, is this a sea change for Brazil for the long term? Is this a changing of the guard? A lot of you mentioned the most popular president is now in jail, that other figures like Dilma Rousseff seem to have reached the end of their political lifespan. So is this a new era of Brazilian politics?
I think there are new people, new faces. We don't know a lot of the new faces. Actually, there is a part of the tsunami is that people...
a lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns, given the peculiarities, the electoral system in Brazil. People with little experience are now going to have to govern or to support, to discuss proposals, etc. One thing that I think they will not do, or if they try to do, there will be a reaction, is the whole business of corruption. This is what cost PT sort of its position, its power, probably its legacy. Bolsonaro is inexperienced. We know a few people that he will rely on. He will rely on retired generals, but he's not the only leader that will do that. And to govern, I think he has initially a period of 4 to 6 months to produce something, and then
Not a very long period of time.
not a long period, and then reality or whatever he does with his popularity, he can transform this in political capital, surprise people, as he surprised all the politicians in Brazil. And you know, life will go on. I think there will be lots of political engagement in Brazil, but let me insist, I don't think, in contrast with other people, despite his political leanings, I don't think that the Brazilian democracy is at risk.
The comparisons to Donald Trump are obvious in many cases. Are they more about style, about substance, or both?
I think they are more about style. Mr. Trump, in contrast with Mr. Bolsonaro, had a whole life in the business sector. Bolsonaro, as he says, he knows nothing about the economy, was an army captain, didn't make much progress in the military career, and became a state delegate in the state of Rio, then a federal congressman, and his claim to fame in that period was to defend the issues that are important for the military in terms of privileges, of pensions, etc. He is certainly popular with the military people, but he's not particularly popular with the higher echelon, because you know, the military in Brazil have returned to the barracks institutionally, behave themselves exemplarily. Brazil participated in peace missions in Haiti, for instance, for more than 10 years. I think the militaries have don't want much to do with governing Brazil. There may be retired generals, like his vice presidential candidate, that will be there. Vice presidential candidate, actually, that has been already disauthorized by Mr. Bolsonaro for saying that you know, the new government was going to change the constitution. This reminded Brazilians immediately of what happened in Venezuela. And Bolsonaro was concluded that this is not very much supported in Brazil. Yes, the constitution needs a lot of adjustment. It can be perfected and changed, but he already said, no, we are going to follow the constitution we have.
Final thought on the likelihood of success. You described two things that are stacked against him. One is the short time period he'll have, 3 to 4 months, to do something significant. And the second is, you describe a very fragmented Congress in the new alignment.
This is key. What is his political ability? A leader in Brazil, a successful leader in Brazil, is one that builds and manages a very diverse political coalition. Dilma Rousseff, Lula's successor. Lula was very talented in that area. President Cardoso was very talented in that area. Dilma Rousseff, a technocrat anointed by Lula, was a complete disaster as a political negotiator. She's an authoritarian person, and, well, she ends being impeached after being re-elected the president of Brazil. It remains to be seen whether Mr. Bolsonaro has that talent. You have to have it. There is no other way. And the other issue is the economy. The Brazilian economy is facing a very major fiscal challenge. Brazil does not have a foreign debt issue like we had 30 plus years ago. Our issue with debt is the domestic debt. Brazil has a state apparatus that is too big, and it's costs a lot of money, much more than people are willing to pay in taxes in order to support it. So there will be choices, and one immediate coming is pension reform. Brazil has a system that supports some 34 million people that work in the private sector and retired, and then there is a special regime for public sector employees. The people that retired from the public sector are privileged because they make about the same amount of money they receive every year that the people from the private sector get. The retirees, the 34 million. This is not sustainable. This has to be reformed. The current president, finishing his term, started an exercise to reform the the social security system, could not do it. He lost credibility in the middle process. Mr. Bolsonaro will have to do some sort of pension reform, some sort of fiscal reform, and there is no alternative to that, because Brazil is kind of a closed economy, but it's open enough to receive the pressures and the reactions of markets. Markets have been mostly positive about Mr. Bolsonaro. Actually, the real has gained value, and now there will be the real issues about, are we going to start opening this economy? We need to do that in order to make it more attractive, more productive, more attractive to both Brazilian and foreign investors. And what is sure is that on January 1st, Mr. Bolsonaro, most likely Mr. Bolsonaro, will be inaugurated as president of Brazil, and life will continue with the same tribulations that democracies have all over the place. He will have to act decisively to show that he is capable of governing. Governability could become a problem if he does not surround himself with a group of competent people that know how to navigate the complexities of the Brazilian economy and the Brazilian political system. On the political system, I don't have much of an apprehension. He has been there for almost 3 decades.
Established relationships. Well, I know whatever happens, whether there's a surprise or no surprise, or whether he succeeds or not, you'll be around to tell us about it. So we'll look forward to you doing that. Paulo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. A pleasure to be with you.
Thanks to you for watching as well. And please join us again for another edition of Wilson Center Now. You can do so either the video version or in our new podcast version. Thanks again.